Welcome back, folks. It's Congo Unfiltered. Happy Saturday. Today, we're gonna look at a couple stories, but really one struggle. So we'll talk about Rwanda. We'll talk about the Congo. It is the same thing. It is still talking about the fight for justice, the fight for truth, um, to reclaim our voices. We will go in Rwanda. We'll go to Congo, to the Silicon Valley in the United States. But to every courtroom and newsroom trying to silence the truth, we are going to try to counter that by reshaping the narrative. So, first, we are going to start with someone who has we're going to start talking about someone who has been um, silenced for over decades, Victoire Ingabire. She is a Rwandan opposition leader. Uh, she's a Rwandan opposition leader, and essentially who has been in prison, right? She's a mother. She's a woman who dared to really challenge Kagame's regime. And then we will talk about a major lawsuit um, that was filed by international rights advocates against Apple. They are accusing them of using minerals tied to conflicts, that they've been smuggling those minerals and exploiting those minerals in the DRC and Rwanda. So, but to open today's episode, um, I'm honored to welcome Ann Garrison. She's a journalist who has spent years covering the Great Lake region, the Congo, U.S. foreign policy, and the stories Western media or mainstream media too often ignore. So, Ann, welcome back. If we can bring Ann on stage. Ann, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, thank you. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. It's Saturday. It's a good day. But let's start here to really dive into our conversation. So, who is Victoire Ingabire, and why does a case matter today?
Okay. Now, I'm going to be repeating some things I've said here before, but they are so far from the mainstream narrative that they bear repeating. Okay. Victoire Ingabire is the Rwandan opposition leader, a Rwandan opposition leader. She returned to Rwanda from exile. She was in Brussels, Belgium, and she was not in Brussels, she was in the Netherlands. She returned from the Netherlands, where she had been in exile. She had earned 2 degrees there in business and law. She had a very good job, wonderful family, but she chose to return to Rwanda to try to stand for the presidency against Paul Kagame, the president, I should say, the totalitarian ruler in that year's presidential election. In the course of that year, it became clear that Rwanda's so-called liberal democracy was just a facade. No serious challenger was being allowed to run for president. And in less than a year, she was in prison. She spent 10 years in prison from 2010 to 2018. And when she was released on the condition that she not leave Rwanda. She was released at the same time that a gospel singer, Kizito Mihigo, was released. He was also forbidden to leave Rwanda, but he tried to cross the Burundian border. He was apprehended and he was dead later. At this point, I don't think that we can get Victoire Ingabire out of Rwanda, but I think we can increase the reputational damage to Kagame of hurting her, even, God forbid, assassinating her or sending her back to prison. Now, here's why she is such a challenge to the Kagame regime. First of all, they said she challenges its liberal facade. Rwanda has a constitution, and it pretends to have elections every 10 years. Kagame wins these elections by ridiculous percentages, last time by 99%. There's a clause in the Constitution that says freedom of speech so long as it doesn't threaten to undermine the government. So they have no freedom of speech. They can be arrested for saying anything that the government then says is intended to undermine or cause the people to rise up, or even to challenge Kagame within the framework of liberal democracy. She's right now in custody and facing trial for allegedly collaborating with 4 other Rwandan dissidents who've been in custody and in pretrial detention. They were in pretrial detention for this for 3 years before they went on trial. And their alleged crime is reading a book about nonviolent protest. That's what they've been in prison for, reading a book about nonviolent protest.
Wow.
And allegedly perhaps organizing nonviolent protest. After they've been in pretrial detention for 3 years, she was arrested for allegedly leading or collaborating with them. So she has exposed Kagame's facade of liberal democracy. He's maintained that for many years, and it's worth mentioning that before he came to power, the West was insisting that the previous government was not practicing liberal democracy. It must, and then Kagame, their guy, came to power. They started tolerating this ridiculous facade. Rwanda is a totalitarian regime. People are spied on relentlessly. The society is even organized into groups. I can't remember the number, but it's organized into units where there's somebody spying on. There's a spy within that unit, keeping track of what all the members do and say. As David Himbara, a Rwandan economist who advised Kagame for a while before he fled, said, it's a totalitarian regime, and the difference between a dictatorship and a totalitarian regime is that people in a dictatorship, so long as they don't try to overthrow the government, are more or less allowed to go on with their lives. But in a totalitarian state, where every move, every word is surveilled and controlled. Okay, now this is why Rwanda is the other facade that Rwanda maintains is that after the Rwandan genocide, it became a miracle of reconciliation, that there's been great reconciliation between Hutu and Tutsi. That's not true at all. A WikiLeaks cable revealed that in the government, every Hutu, to any position of power, is paired with a Tutsi who has the real power. Okay, now to what's wrong, what Victoire revealed about the misrepresentation, the false narrative about the Rwandan genocide, which is his excuse for being at war in Congo for the past 30 years. Okay, most people know only about the last 90 days of the Rwandan Civil War, which went on from 1990 to 1994. They only know about the massacres of the last 90 days. That's what was known as the Rwandan genocide until Kagame's propaganda machine was so effective that they managed to have it renamed the genocide against the Tutsi. They wanted to say that only Tutsis were massacred, or a few moderate Hutus who tried to save them. But this narrative was established within days of Kagame seizing power at the end of the 90 days of massacres. He was totally in control of the process of counting the dead. He sent people out to do that. They came back in a ridiculous amount of time. By no means the time to do any kind of scientific study of what had happened, who had died, how many had died. So he was totally in control of the narrative. And the narrative became that extremist Hutus rose up and murdered 1 million Tutsis. The number has gone back and forth for years at this point, and I have no idea why, but the mainstream media has settled on the figure 800,000. But as Judy Weaver revealed in her book, and as other writers, including the academics Christian Davenport and Alan Stam, who spent 10 years in Rwanda studying this, hundreds of thousands of Hutus died. Judy Weaver concluded that more Hutus died than Tutsis, and that they were massacred largely by Kagame's army. But this was totally left out of the narrative, and so the Rwandan state was established on Hutu guilt and Tutsi victimhood. 2 years after the end of the Rwandan Civil War and the 90 days of massacres, Kagame and Museveni invaded the Congo. And their excuse for doing that was that Hutu refugees had fled into the Congo and they were threatening the Rwandan state. They were threatening to come back to Rwanda and finish the genocide, commit another genocide. Later, the accusation came to be that they were threatening Congolese Tutsis. And they have sustained that argument for 30 years. Despite decades of UN reports, the UN reports have demonstrated that they're there to steal the resources, that they have collaboration of Western governments and Western corporations and Western banks. But there are very few people who read the reports. I mean, sometimes the media quotes the reports, but then they go and talk to Kagame, who says, we're there because there are Hutus in the jungle. We have to protect ourselves. We have to protect Rwanda, to protect them from coming back to commit another genocide. We have to protect Tutsis in Congo, and we have a defensive posture. And the documents in the peace agreement, so-called, have identified Rwanda as having a defensive posture. They've over and over reproduced this narrative. So I don't think Rwanda's aggression and dominance in Congo can be stopped until the truth about the Rwandan genocide is told. And therefore, Kagame loses his excuse, and M23 loses their excuse. M23 has used the same excuse. And M23 is a Rwandan militia. It's been demonstrated that they are under Rwandan command. That's been demonstrated over and over, especially in the last several years, but it was demonstrated in the UN report of 2012. During that, I think the M23 war then went on from 2010 to 2012. I'd have to go back and check to be sure, but I think that's what.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. In any case, it was proven in the UN studies at that time that the M23 was under Rwandan command, and even James Kabarebe, who was the defense chief at the time, was meeting with M23 commanders at the border, arranging logistics and supplying them with weapons. It just hasn't mattered. It hasn't mattered enough. But Victoire Ingabire told the truth about the Rwandan genocide as well as she was able at the time. And even what she said was too much. What she said landed her in prison for 8 years. When she arrived in Rwanda, she went to the genocide memorial almost as soon as she got there. And the first thing that she said was, where is the memorial to the Hutu? She didn't claim that there was a genocide or that there had been a Hutu genocide, because that's illegal. In Rwanda, you go to prison for that, genocide ideology or genocide denial. But that was enough. That was hugely threatening. Where's the memorial to the Hutu?
And something very interesting that you said, and that'll be a really good segment for the next our next guest. You talked about the narrative that she is in jail for simply writing a book challenging the narrative around the genocide.
That's one
Why
thing.
do you think, yeah, that's one thing. Why do you think the mainstream media doesn't speak much about her, about her case, and particularly about how a dictatorship, how Paul Kagame's regime has been silencing opposition, sometimes for simply telling the truth?
Well, they've done more since 2010. 2010 changed a great deal. She changed a great deal by doing this hugely courageous thing, returning to Rwanda from a very comfortable life to challenge the narrative and try to run for president. Since that time, there's been more press coverage of the fact that Rwanda is a repressive regime. The press always notes that Kagame won the election, ha ha ha, by 99%. Who believes that? But it doesn't change the narrative about the Rwandan genocide or Rwanda's excuse for being in Congo. But as I said, it did change the narrative about what the Rwandan government is now. And she has since been able to publish in CNN, The Guardian, African Arguments, and the Kenyan publication, The Elephant, particularly about the repression in Rwanda and about the fact that Rwandans are, for the most part, hungry, that Kagame claims he's made all this progress, but there's been a very small decrease in the number of people who are hungry. So they've allowed that much space, and they also talked to her, and this is when CNN invited her to write, when the UK had this cockamamie plan to deport immigrants to Rwanda for processing. And there was huge opposition to that, and she was able to write a piece about it for CNN. So there's some coverage of that. There's some coverage of how repressive Rwanda is, but not about what's wrong with the genocide narrative. That's still confined to the margins that people like myself and Judy Reaver write and speak in.
And there is an event happening next week, I believe, with Code Pink. You want to talk about it real quick?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about everything I just talked about. With Code Pink, we have a webinar. It'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 p.m. Pacific Time, and whatever it is in between. And we chose that time because we want people from the Women's International Network for Democracy and Peace in Belgium to be able to participate. So we can have people on both coasts and in Europe. Victoire has significant support in Europe and in Canada. Somewhat, she's not so visible in the United States. In Europe, legislatures have passed resolutions calling for her freedom. And they haven't spoken to what's wrong with the Rwandan genocide narrative or how it's been used to support the Rwandan Congo, but they have spoken to what's wrong, to Rwanda's facade of liberal democracy and why she should not be repressed. She should not go back to prison simply for free speech and the mildest nonviolent opposition. But what the question was, why? Oh no, you asked about the webinar. Yeah, we can probably finish there and let your next guest come on. In the webinar, we'll have 4 pieces to it. One, I'm going to explain much of what I have just explained, and then Judy Reaver, the author of In Praise of Blood, Crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, is going to explain more about the narrative, what's wrong with the narrative, which Victoire challenged. Then we're going to have someone from the Oakland Institute. Frederick, you probably know who I'm talking about.
Frederick Rousseau. Yes.
Rousseau is going to talk about the Congo peace deal. Code Pink is a peace organization, so they particularly want to understand this in terms of the Congo War and the bogus Congo peace deal. And then someone from the International Network for the International Women's Network for Democracy and Peace, will be on to talk about what they're doing, both in regard to the Congo War and into trying to secure Victoire's freedom.
This sounds like an amazing event. Please send us all the details. We will be in touch and see how. Well, I will definitely be there if that match my schedule. But at the very least, we would like to also stream that so that the viewers can also hear everything that we need that needs to be said around the Congo, around Rwanda. So, Anne, thank you so much.
Great. That's great. Okay, you're most welcome. Okay,
yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
How do I get out of? How do I? Can you turn me
on? We got you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, peace out.
And peace. And so that was Ann Garrison literally just reminding us that the justice must be global, right? Like there needs to be that global solidarity. There needs to be that regional talk about justice, and that political prisoners like Victoire Ingabire must never be forgotten. It's very imperative for us to continue to elevate her profile, to continue to speak about what's going on in Rwanda, and also pursue her work of challenging the current narrative regarding the Rwandan genocide. That we're not just talking about one tribe that was killed, that we should not consider one tribe or one ethnic group superior than the other, because justice would like us to be equitable. So with that being said, we're going to pivot to another front in this struggle for justice. And we're going to go now to the United States, the courtroom, where tech giant Apple is being sued. And the case goes really right to the heart of the Congo, the heart of Rwanda as well, and also the minerals that is buried in our soil, in the soil of Congo. And the organization behind the lawsuits, for those who have been reading about it on Al Jazeera and other mainstream media, is the International Rights Advocate, the same team, the same organization that previously took on Tesla, Google. These folks are not afraid to take on big techs. So today we're joined by someone that had the chance and the honor to meet a few weeks ago at Harvard. And then that's a woman who actually understands both the legal strategy and the human state behind the new lawsuits. So if we can bring on Olamide Abiose, if possible. And Olamide is the attorney. She's an attorney with International Rights Advocates. And before joining the IRA, International Rights Advocates, she practiced at a different law firm working on major patent litigation in tech and utilities. She holds a law degree from Stanford and PhD in neuroscience from Stanford Medicine, and a degree from Harvard and Washington University. As you can hear, a brilliant mind, and I'm really honored. Olamide, how are you? Glad to see you.
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for inviting me.
I'm good. Well, let's start very simple, right? What exactly happened with the new lawsuit against Apple?
Yeah, so on November 25th, just a little over a week ago, we sued Apple for false and deceptive marketing with respect to its critical mineral supply chain from Congo, and specifically with respect to cobalt and tantalum sourcing. So tantalum is a processed form of coltan, which is extracted from the DRC and then refined by companies and then sold to Apple in the form of tantalum. And we filed in the District of Columbia. The DC has this really unique consumer protection law called the Consumer Protections Procedures Act. And basically it protects DC consumers from unlawful trade practices. And it allows public interest organizations like IRA advocates to sue on behalf of the general public. So that's precisely what we did. And we asked the court to issue an order declaring Apple's marketing practices to be unlawful and to stop Apple from engaging in these deceptive marketing practices and false advertising.
Why DC though? Why did you guys choose DC?
Yeah, DC, like I said, it's this really unique law that is on behalf of consumers, and it goes beyond, it allows public interest organizations to sue, and that's kind of a unique feature compared to other states, for instance. And consumer protection law in general allows us to focus on the advertising that companies are doing. So it was kind of a legal strategy in terms of the law itself and its friendliness to plaintiffs.
Why this lawsuit matters, particularly for the Congo? Why is it such a big deal, according to you, for the Congo, and why?
I think this lawsuit is really important for education and public awareness, especially because it can be really hard when you're an ordinary consumer. And maybe you're hearing about human rights abuses, from different activist groups, but you're not sure how it relates to like your everyday shopping decisions. And it can be really hard when companies say they're conflict free, they're sustainable, they ethically source. You don't necessarily have the tools to go and challenge that by yourself. And so this lawsuit helps because we do the supply chain tracing, and we also bring in a lot of the amazing research that different organizations have done. And we offer this place that basically challenges the advertising that companies are doing, whereas it might otherwise not be challenged. And we bring it to the public's awareness so they can be more informed about their consumer choices.
I guess yeah, go ahead. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah.
To say that for years we've heard about like human and rights abuses of some war crimes in Eastern Congo, but companies a lot to distance themselves from that. They've said that their supply chains are regularly audited. They've said that there's a lot of monitoring, or that they don't have any conflict in their supply chains. And so this lawsuit is important because it shows how instead of actually meaningfully changing things on the ground and actually developing sustainable sourcing practices, the lawsuit alleges that companies like Apple are relying on deceptive marketing to distract from what's actually going on and to shirk their responsibilities to people and the planet.
So are these the specific accusation, deceptive marketing, or are they like more to that?
It's like deceptive marketing, false advertising. What the act allows us to do is basically point out all the representations that Apple makes about their ethical sourcing practices. And they have a supplier code of conduct that is supposed to be really strict. It's supposed to require no forced labor in their supply chains, that suppliers do a lot of like environmental procedures to prevent pollution and spills and things like that. So it's actually quite extensive what Apple says it requires of its suppliers so that it can advertise its products as like sustainable and good for the planet. And so this lawsuit shows how those representations are completely contradictory to what's actually happening on the ground within Apple's own supply chain.
And what's the story with Apple's, I guess, recycled cobalt? And I know that that's what they've been claiming. Is it even possible for them to 100% operate on what they call as recycled cobalt? Like, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a really important part of this lawsuit because I think a lot of people have been assuaged by the idea that like cobalt's 100% recycled. But this lawsuit discusses how Apple uses a mass balance approach to cobalt recycling. So it involves mixing raw ore with scrap metal, and then that is combined and then refined into recycled cobalt. And then basically say you took 20% scrap metal, 80% raw ore, you combine it and you process it into some output. So you take 20% of that output and say it's all recycled. But it's impossible to prove, especially as we described in the lawsuit, it's impossible to prove that that's truly fully recycled, that there's no raw ore in that recycled output. So I think that's important for people to know because when you think recycling, you think it's like recycled input, recycled output. That's like the ordinary understanding. And a lot of people are not aware that this mass balance approach can be confusing. And a lot of the same suppliers that provided Apple with raw ore in the past, or maybe continue to, like Umicore, for instance, are also involved in the battery recycling process and perhaps actually supplying Apple with recycled content. So I think it's reasonable to be suspicious of the recycled content claims, like what that actually means. And most importantly, in the lawsuit, we say that, they say that they use 100% recycled cobalt, but they can't guarantee that there's no raw in that. And they list a bunch of suppliers that are still engaged in forced labor, child labor, environmental degradation, etc. So those concerns are still relevant to Apple today.
So more on the ethical perspective, why do you think it's important for Apple to market themselves as not like to actually be honest and upfront about them getting conflict free minerals? Why do you think it's important, or being able to talk about the source of their products? Why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, it's important. And I'm also happy to talk more about like the specific allocations. Like your audience may be familiar with some of the companies that I mentioned.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. But maybe I'll start first with why this matters, because it's an important question. It's because companies actually profit off of these labelings. It's not just like some innocent thing that they do to, I don't know, look good or whatever. Well, that is part of why they do it, to look good. And consumers actually care. So there's a lot of studies that show that consumers are willing to pay more for products if they know that they've been ethically sourced. Yeah, like for instance, a 2021 survey found that 88% of consumers prefer buying from companies with ethical sourcing, and that 83% said they would pay more for ethically sourced products. And we talk about this in the complaint. We cite a bunch of different studies that show that consumers want conflict-free sourcing, they want fair labor practices, environmental sustainability, free from corruption, human trafficking, child labor. And consistently, they say that they'll pay more to get goods in that way. And so consumers care about this, but like I said before, and why this lawsuit is important is they don't have all the tools necessarily to make those decisions independent of what the companies say they're doing. So lawsuits like this and the law in DC is really important to help consumers be aware and be protected, because they intentionally want to spend more money on goods that they think are better for the planet. And I can talk a little bit about like what we're actually accusing Apple of in terms of their supply chain, but I'm sure a lot of your listeners are already familiar with these allegations as well. So basically, we allege that Apple's suppliers, whether it's with cobalt or tantalum, are among the most corrupt human rights abusers in the world. We talked a little bit about the mass balance approach. So with respect to cobalt sourcing, it still matters who the suppliers are, because it's likely that there's raw cobalt ore still getting into Apple products, even if they say they're 100% recycled. Apple is supplied by Umicore and a bunch of other companies as well that source from Glencore. And as many may know, Glencore has been sanctioned by the Department of Justice on bribery charges and fined nearly $1 billion for unpaid royalties by the DRC tax authorities. It also includes YU Cobalt that operates artisanal mines that are rife with forced labor. And actually, YU's subsidiary, Congo Unfiltered Mining, or CDM, was recently suspended, I believe, a few weeks ago due to a massive spill and environmental degradation that they caused. So that's just an example of what we're trying to say in the lawsuit, of how Apple may represent itself as environmentally conscious and that its suppliers are held to a high standard of environmental sustainability, but in reality, just one example with CDM, it's clear that that's not the case. And even beyond these two suppliers, we talk about how cobalt suppliers across the board within Apple's supply chain, the lawsuit talks about how they exploit workers, utilize child labor, pollute and contaminate surrounding environments, forcibly evict residents, that's a big issue as well, and then kill and torture community members through violence by security forces. So that's just even the cobalt side of things, but we also look at coltan, because that's so tied to the violence going on in Eastern Congo and M23. And the lawsuit points to 4 tantalum suppliers that process coltan that's likely sourced from the Rwanda region and the mines in that area. And what we discuss, and Global Witness has done some really great reporting around this too, about how coltan from DRC is smuggled into Rwanda, then labeled conflict-free, and then provided to the global marketplace. And one of Apple's tantalum suppliers is actually sourcing coltan. The lawsuit points out it's sourcing coltan from this company called East Rise Corporation, which was just sanctioned by the US government in August 2025 for materially supporting war crimes by particle FF. So that's even just one example. But we also identified 3 other suppliers in Apple's tantalum supply chain that are sourcing from a Rwandan trading company that was even suspended by ITSI. And ITSI itself has had, a lot of allegations of facilitating smuggling in the past. So this is one that, it's very likely, smuggling coltan from DRC and coltan associated with the Ubaya mines. And one of Apple's suppliers was buying from this Rwandan trading company as recently as March 2025. And this is all really important because, as many of your viewers will know, the government of Congo sued Apple in December 2024, early January 2025.
That case was dismissed, right?
Yeah, well, there's 2 cases, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that, but obviously I wasn't involved in that.
Please do talk about all of them.
But what I'll just say is that, first of all, those were criminal complaints, and this is a civil action. But what I want to highlight about that is that Apple came out with some press statements, and they also came out in response to our complaint, saying that they ordered their suppliers to stop sourcing from Congo and Rwanda in June 2024. And in their conflict minerals report, it says that we found no reasonable basis for concluding that any smelters or refiners of 3TG, so that includes tantalum, identified in our supply chain as of December 31st, 2024, directly or indirectly financed or benefited armed groups in the DRC or an adjoining company. So they say that both that their suppliers as of June 2024 are not supposed to be sourcing from Congo and Rwanda, but in the lawsuit, we've analyzed trade data. So that's data on customs declarations, bills of lading, and shipping. So basically, it kind of like tracks international shipments from country to country. So we look at that data in the lawsuit, and we talk about like that's just not true. That like we point at least 4 suppliers that are either sourcing from Rwanda or from the DRC directly, including from a company sanctioned by the U.S. government. So that's a unique part of this lawsuit that hasn't been done before. That look at trade data specifically, although these suppliers have been flagged by Global Witness and have been identified in the past, so they're kind of like repeat offenders.
That's actually interesting because it has been really hard to get accountability in any shape or form against those big companies. And talking about, I think you mentioned the child labor lawsuit that was dismissed earlier. And can you talk more about that and really make the big distinction of the difference between that case that was dismissed and the current one that you already talk about?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And as you pointed out, like these cases can be really difficult. These companies are really powerful, and the law isn't necessarily on the side of human rights defenders. With respect to the government of DRC's complaints, the one in France was dismissed, but I believe the one in Belgium is still under investigation. But yeah, but like I said, this is even civil actions that we've engaged in the past. So almost 6 years ago, we filed a complaint in Doe v. Apple. And like you said, we sued Tesla, Dell, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. And that was on behalf of artisanal miners with respect to cobalt. So my boss—
Children, by the way.
Children, yeah. My boss was invited to meet these children, or sometimes their families, because the children were killed in mining accidents. And all of these children were either injured in mining accidents or killed, or one was even shot by security forces. So like deeply badly wounded. And they're back then as well, companies were a little bit less mindful about artisanal cobalt entering their supply chains. Like there was a big Amnesty International report in 2015 or so, 2016, that raised a lot of awareness. And for instance, YU Cobalt was like unaware of how much artisanal cobalt was entering its supply chains. Anyway, we sued all of those companies. Basically, we didn't just say that, oh, you have cobalt in their supply chains. We were suing under the Trafficking Victims Protection and Reauthorization Act. And so that act basically makes it illegal to engage in human trafficking. or forced labor, and to not only engage in it, but to like facilitate it, or in term participate in the venture that benefits from those activities. So it's definitely a higher standard than what we're doing this complaint, because the law hadn't been defined in the DC circuit at the time. So part of why we were dismissed is because the court basically outlined the law of what it means to be participating in a venture involving forced labor or human trafficking. But like I said, the law is different. The legal standard, what you have to prove that someone's facilitating forced labor, is a lot more than just proving that they have a supply chain that doesn't match or concord with how they market or advertise their supply chain. I will also say, like, we didn't have coltan or tantalum at all in that complaint. It was focused on cobalt. And there's pros and cons. Like, when you take an action like what we did 6 years ago, you can get relief for the actual people affected, like the actual miners who were injured. In this case, this is on behalf of the DC general public. We're not looking for monetary damages. We're looking for an order stopping Apple from engaging in false advertising practices, and a declaration that its conduct is unlawful. So there's pros and cons to each. But that's basically, those are the major differences between the two complaints.
So if the IRA wins tomorrow, what is essentially at stake for Apple? What would happen to Apple?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, if IRA advocates won, the court, in a perfect world, the court would issue an order saying that Apple's representations about its cobalt and tantalum sourcing violate the CPPA, that they're deceptive, and it's unlawful to present its critical mineral sourcing as sustainable or responsibly sourced when there's all these issues. And then it would issue an injunction saying that Apple can no longer advertise its products in this way. So you can't say that, and I can pull up some of the representations as well, so that you can get a sense of like what we're talking about here. For instance, like when it came to forced labor, Apple said that it found no instance of forced labor or debt bondage labor in its supply chain in 2024. And then we point to a study as of 2025 that documented all sorts of instances of forced labor in mines that supply Apple's, that are either owned or supply Apple's suppliers. That's just one example of like, perhaps the court would force Apple to, in a subsequent report, not say something as strong as there's no instances of forced labor, no instances of debt bondage labor, and let me see if I can find another one. We have 0 incidences of underage labor for more than 5 years. So these are all the types of statements that Apple is making about its supply chain, while still
It's actually funny.
Yeah,
Which is actually funny because they probably expect people not to know all of these, right? Because they're like, "I'll be buying in the Congo. Who knows what the Congo is?" The president of the United States didn't even know what the Congo was until recently. I guess my question that I have for, like, if they're found in the perfect world, justice is being held, and then there is accountability for Apple. They lose in the courtroom. So are they risking to be fined, or is it just, hey, you just have to fix, your advertising strategy and no longer say this, no longer do that, and fix also your supply chain? But are they just getting a slap in the wrist and that's it? Like, no big fine? Because Elon Musk and Tesla got fined by the EU recently, I think $100 million. So I'm really curious because if we really try to set precedents, and if we try to really lead by example, I wonder if the result of the outcome of it will not deter other companies, and that will also be my next question, other companies to do the exact same way. So what are really like, what is Apple risking? Are they gonna get fined? I like what's something that could actually shake in their apparatus?
Yeah, so like I said, we're not seeking money damages in this
Yeah.
complaint. So I do want to say that even though maybe like so punitive damages could be an example of like a fine that you could seek in a case. But I do want to say that even if we're not seeking those forms of relief, it doesn't mean that this doesn't have a deterring effect. You know, like it there's the litigation, the fact that like this is a threat that can happen based on how you represent your supply chain is something that should, if it's not already, giving companies pause and raising awareness. Like I saw like an ESG report the other day that was like including our case in its roundup and telling companies that like maybe representations about 100% conflict free or 100% recycled, maybe those are too strong. So already this type of thing raises awareness for not just the public, but also for companies in terms of how far can they really go when they make their representations, because the court will actually outline for them that actually if you make certain representations like this and your supply chain looks like this, that's unlawful in this court and you're opening yourself up for liability. So that does have a deterrent effect. There's also the fact that like even before you get to the conclusion of a lawsuit, there's a stage called discovery where basically each side has access to each other's documents to try to like help prove their case. And who knows, like that's far ahead, so I don't want to speculate about like, you know, whether we'll get to that stage or how. But that can also that can be a deterring factor as well because a lot of companies don't want their like internal documents, their wire transactions, all those things.
So they could just settle, even though there
It's
was
possible.
no.
A lot of these cases do settle, but discovery is the other thing too, where like, say it goes that far, maybe that could be revealing as well. It's really hard to find a lot of the information that's needed to prevail in these lawsuits because company supply chains are really opaque. There's all of the court contracts between their suppliers and buyers and things like that is not available to the public. So there's only so much you can work with. And companies don't want that information getting out. It's perhaps maybe if you lift the hood, who knows what one would find. So those are important aspects to think about as well. That like that's another deterring factor for companies. They don't want these types of lawsuits to be coming towards their doorstep.
Yeah. So what should Congolese people, the diaspora, African diaspora, and even global citizen, American citizen watching us be doing right now about this case? How could we help with the case?
I think so. We intentionally filed this like around the Black Friday, Christmas shopping season because we really want people to, as they're doing their holiday shopping, to be informed about Apple's supply chain as we describe in the lawsuit. So I think definitely publicizing the lawsuit, some of the media coverage. We also have on our social media like a quick graphic that breaks down the claims in an easy to understand way. I think sharing that would be very helpful because you know there's reputational damage that Apple risks that they probably don't want to experience, and so it benefits them if these lawsuits don't get a lot of attention because then they can just like try to bully our smaller organization and not necessarily suffer any consequences. So I think it's important to follow this. Even though there have been cases in the past that haven't necessarily prevailed, I do think there's an element of like when there's smoke, there's fire. And I think with this lawsuit, we're trying to demonstrate how, you know, Apple is perhaps just trying to obscure from their complicity in human rights abuses rather than meaningfully change things. And perhaps only with public pressure will we see like meaningful change in their supply chain sourcing and practices. Apple just crossed like the $4 trillion market value cap.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, in a few months ago. And it's only one of like a few companies in the world that has done that. And so it can't like, we can't pretend like that didn't happen on the backs of Congolese people who are being exploited or killed. in manufacturing the products, and Apple has kind of evaded serious, responsibility or consequences as a result of this. And I think it's only with collective pressure that we can make a change. And lawsuits like this are actually really helpful for giving us tools in our pocket to make arguments against Apple. Like even in our last lawsuit, I think we gave light to the issue of child mining in cobalt extraction because we had all of these plaintiffs and their detailed stories. And we also connected it to Apple's supply chain and among other companies. So we do something similar in this lawsuit. And there's a lot of detailed information there, even data about how much coltan, for instance, in kilograms was sourced in the different months and how much by the suppliers that Apple relies on. So there's a lot of facts there that I think people could look at and use in their advocacy as well.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you are in liberty to say, but I'm going to take my chance and still ask. Why just Apple? Can we expect more lawsuits against companies based in the US?
Well, what I will say is we filed a lawsuit against Tesla in August as kind of a similar type of lawsuit. It was only focused on cobalt, and we're currently in the middle of litigation now with the Tesla's counsel, so I can't speak too much on it. And I probably can't speak too much on like future directions necessarily, but I do think that these sorts of lawsuits should put those sorts of companies on notice, and really evaluate their supply chains and like their influence to change things on the ground. Because like I said, some of these companies are more powerful than nations. And it's not fair to say that they have no, responsibility or ability to help change things on the ground.
Olamide, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, folks, you heard the international rights advocates attorney that was with us, giving us, I would say, exclusive interview regarding what they're doing. And she said it. Tech companies are literally put on notice because what has been happening in the Congo can no longer be hidden. And the profits surrounding the crisis of the Congo, how the crisis of the Congo is beneficial for so many people except the Congolese people themselves. So when we have a 3 decades war, and I said it yesterday during a live with Brother Maurice, and I said that so many times that we can talk about a peace deal. We can talk about peace. But there is one thing that never changed. For the 3 decades of war that the Congolese people have known, 3 decades of war, 3 decades of war, 30 years, that has not changed how the West, how the United States, how those big companies get the minerals to make iPhones, to make PlayStation 4, 5, PlayStation 2, even 1. It doesn't change how the automobile industry with the EV batteries get the supplies. It doesn't change how companies are able to get minerals to make laptops. That has not changed. It doesn't matter how many Congolese people die. It doesn't matter the condition in which the Congolese people, children, allow me to talk here in this show about child labor, children that have no other options than work when the place should be in school. Yet in the midst of all of that chaos, somehow you have companies like Apple that continue to purchase minerals in the Congo. Sometimes even allegedly, don't want to get sued here, lying on the statement, on the report about where they get the supplies. They are put on notice because human beings, organizations that care about the Congo, that care about human rights, that care about the law, period, are watching. You are watching. We are watching. We are watching to essentially unmask the power. We are watching to tell the truth. Ann Garrison earlier talked about shaping the narrative, because when you want justice, when you want peace, it is very imperative to reshape the narrative, a narrative that is out there, that is not even aligning with the truth, not even close to the reality. A narrative that is making it seems like that the iPhone that you're buying comes from recycled cobalt or coltan, that it comes from conflict-free minerals. There was no such thing as conflict-free minerals. That the war in the Congo is an ethnic, tribal war, when there are evidence of a nation invading the country, that the poverty of the Congo or in the Congo of Congolese people is somehow inherent, because the Congolese people are some sort of inferior folks because they're Black, because they are Africans, hiding how those who are leading the country are actually rich. Rich to the point that is insulting to the very poverty that the Congolese people are undergoing. So rich that the World Bank had to literally suppress a report in 2020 that was looking at the money that was going to African countries, to third world countries, and what happened to those aid, what happened to that fund, to those funds. But that report had to be leaked. And the head of the president of the World Bank at the time had to resign. Zero accountability. And not even a single look at even those leaders that are in power today in the Congo. A president that is illegitimate, that was never elected, gets to go in Washington, D.C. and sign a peace deal, a strategic minerals or partnership between the U.S. and the Congo, when he has zero legitimacy. The same president that is siphoning Congolese money, millions of dollars, going over budgets, and he's unable to even address the needs of the Congolese people. Same leader in Rwanda that has been in power ever since 2002, that we talked yesterday. And if you haven't watched the live from yesterday, please, after this, as you cleaning, it's Saturday, as you're doing laundry, chores, put yesterday's show on and listen to it. Why do you need to be in power for over 20 years? That is what happened to the Congo. 18 years, Joseph Kabila in power. How did he get in power? We all know. Militia groups backed by Rwanda, backed by Uganda, but who is funding it, really? Who is allowing that to happen? Because the world is operating on the dollars. That's how people buy their weapons, in dollars. What else? They're not using the rubles, I can guarantee you that. They're not using Chinese currency to buy weapons. They're using dollars. They're using American currency. That's what they have in their bank accounts. Why are they allowed to buy weapons that are displacing millions, killing millions in American currency? Why are they even allowed to even have bank accounts in dollars, in US dollars? Why are they allowed or to walk on red carpets in the US? That's Paul Kagame. That was Joseph Kabila. And that is currently Felix Tshisekedi. I'm talking about dictators that are not only killing each other or allowing the people to kill each other, but also killing their own people. So we're going to go roll the red carpet, invite dictators here in the US, beacon of hope and democracy and human rights, because the US is and has been since its creation the headquarters of the United Nations of International Law, the architect of international law, yet we allow criminals to set foot in this country. Architect of international law to this current form, yet we allow them to kill hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Yet we allow them to create an influx of refugees so that tomorrow we can say, we have an immigration problems. You need to stop immigration. Because this is what happened, right? That's what happened. Trump just announced pausing immigration to 19 countries. The DRC should have been on that list, but the DRC is not. Instead, is the Congo Brazzaville. The DRC is not on that list, but it should have been on that list because it is a leading country in terms of refugees arrival in the US. Why it's not on the list? Obviously, political reasons. Congo Brazzaville taking stray bullets for the issue of the neighbors. That is the product, which is a product of a US foreign policy. We are going to allow dictators to get to power in the Congo so that they can siphon money supposed to develop a country or reduce poverty or take care of, provide justice to women that have been raped, provide reparation for folks that have been out of the house, their homes. Because you also have companies operating in the Congo. They are extracting minerals and they're doing that knowing that there are homes on top of where they want to dig. Go look up Even Hope. Not sure if I'm even pronouncing the names. All those Canadian or American companies involved into displacing hundreds of families. Yet, yes, it's the Congolese government who ordered it, but who advocated for it? And Apple buying the minerals to smelters and mining sites, that they know, or they should have known, that there are grave human rights violations happening in those mining sites. Yet they close their eyes. Because they do not want you to know that the iPhone that you have in your hands has components whose blood had to be spilled for that to even happen, for that to even be shipped in the Congo, in the US. Extracted in the Congo by kids whose place should have been in school. Extracted in the Congo by folks that literally have militia groups pointing guns at them, extracted by people who are being paid less than $2 a day. So if it's not a gun forcing them to do it, poverty is forcing them to do it because they have to survive. And we're not even calling for the respect of workers' rights. The same way here we have a Bureau of Labor that talks specifically about wages. That we have OSHA that talks specifically about the safety of the workers. Yet overseas, these companies are allowed to operate without any consideration of those laws that make the US the country that it is today. Yeah. So these companies are put on notice. And for all of them, they must know that people are refusing to be silenced. The people are going to continue to tell the truth, no matter the cost. Because you can jail people like the jailing Victoire Ingabire. You can prevent people from entering in the country by denying them with visa. You can kill people for speaking the truth, but you cannot jail a revolution. You cannot keep captive an idea that is a just idea, an idea of human rights, an idea of justice. We said that all must obey the law, that everyone must obey the law. What makes it so particular to multinational companies to be above the law, to lobby so that laws are actually crafted to cover the crimes, or that laws are being bent to allow them to commit crimes. And that's the message that we're putting out there today. That these companies are being put on notice. That we are going to continue to advocate for justice. That we are going to continue to call out mainstream media for refusing to question, for refusing to ask the right question. We're signing a peace deal, or the US is facilitating a peace deal between Rwanda and Congo. Why? What's going on in the Congo? That we are asking them to stop fighting. Who is fighting who? The Congo has been invaded so many times. Part of Congolese territories do not even belong to the Congolese government. Why are we talking about peace without justice? Why are we talking about peace without the end of the occupation? Why are we talking about peace without talking about the roots of the issue? And I'm not talking about the roots as presented by Paul Kagame's regime, that they have to protect the Tutsis. They have to fight the FDLR, who multiple UN reports have shown that are literally in Rwanda apparatus, military apparatus system. There are Rwandan military officers. So today, that's what the conversation was about. And what we're asking you today is to share this episode, start a conversation, and keep your eyes on the courtroom because this fight is far from being over. This fight is far from being over. And Congo is not just rich in minerals, it's also rich in people who truly deserve justice. So until next time, this is Congo Unfiltered. My name is Gaëtan, and I will catch you next week. We're going to have a great guest, a great conversation. So thank you so much, y'all, and I will see you next week.